What if I told you that the most powerful military on earth just lost control of its own war, and now the people who started it are scrambling to hide the truth from the entire world? Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. Right now, at this very moment, something extraordinary is unfolding across the Middle East. The carefully constructed narrative of American military supremacy is crumbling in real time. The air campaign that was supposed to bring Iran to its knees has done the opposite. It has revealed weaknesses that our adversaries are now exploiting, and the leadership in Washington is doing everything in its power to keep you from understanding just how dangerous this situation has become. If you want to understand what is really happening behind the closed doors of the Pentagon, the White House, and the intelligence agencies, smash that like button and let the algorithm know you are watching. Every click helps break through the wall of propaganda and bring the truth to more people who deserve to know what their government is actually doing in their name. Here is what they are not telling you on the evening news: the so called ceasefire, the pause, the diplomatic breakthrough that headlines are celebrating right now. None of it is real. This is not about peace. This is not about negotiations. This is about buying time, time to reload, time to restock, time to prepare for the next phase of a war that has already gone catastrophically wrong. Let me take you behind the curtain, because what you are about to learn will change everything you thought you understood about American power, Israeli influence, and the future of the Middle East itself. In the opening days of this conflict, the United States launched one of the most intense air campaigns in modern military history. We are talking about somewhere between 12 and $16 billion worth of precision munitions, cruise missiles, and exotic weaponry expended in just the first 72 to 96 hours. Think about that number for a moment. $16 billion gone in less than a week. And what did it accomplish? The Iranian government is still standing. The Iranian military is still intact. The integrated air and missile defense systems that were supposed to be obliterated in the first wave of strikes are still operational. The leadership that Washington promised would flee or surrender is still in control. Now, you might be thinking, well, surely the damage was significant. Surely Iran is reeling from such a massive assault, and that is exactly what the Pentagon wants you to believe. But the reality on the ground tells a very different story. Here is where it gets truly disturbing. Before the first missile was ever launched, there was a plan that had nothing to do with direct military confrontation. The intelligence agencies, and we are talking about the CIA, the Mossad, and British MI6, believed they had found a golden opportunity. The economic situation inside Iran had created genuine public discontent. The Iranian currency, the rial, had collapsed in value. Inflation was crushing ordinary families. People were protesting in the streets over legitimate grievances about their economic conditions. And what did our intelligence services do with this moment of genuine popular frustration? They tried to hijack it. They flooded the country with thousands of Starlink terminals. They pumped in enormous quantities of cash. They provided instructions, training, and support to elements within the protest movement. And according to multiple sources, including evidence that has emerged from communications intercepts and documents seized by Iranian security forces, they encouraged protesters to fire on police in order to provoke a violent crackdown. Think about the cynicism of that strategy for a moment. The goal was not to support genuine reform or to help the Iranian people. The goal was to manufacture chaos, to create martyrs, to generate the kind of bloody footage that would further destabilize the regime and provide justification for military intervention. But it failed. It failed for reasons that the architects of this plan never anticipated. And that failure set the stage for everything that has gone wrong since. Stay with me here because this next part is crucial to understanding the entire strategic picture. One of the most significant developments that received almost no coverage in Western media happened just days before the air campaign began. Iranian and Turkish military forces cooperated in a joint operation that annihilated 400 Kurdish fighters who were attempting to cross from Syria into Iran. 400 fighters gone in a coordinated strike between two nations that have historically been rivals and sometimes outright enemies. Now, why does this matter? Because it signals something profound about how the regional powers view this conflict. Turkey and Iran are what we call civilizational states. These are not artificial constructs drawn up by European colonial powers. Iran is Persia. The Persian Empire has existed for 2,500 years. Turkey emerged from the steppes of Central Asia and built one of the great empires in human history. Both nations understand something that American policymakers consistently fail to grasp. Their survival as civilizational entities depends on regional stability. Neither Turkey nor Iran is going to help the United States or Israel destroy the other, because they recognize that the fragmentation of one civilizational state threatens the existence of all civilizational states. This is why, when American strategists look at a map and see opportunities for divide and conquer, Turkish and Iranian leaders see existential threats that demand cooperation, and this cooperation extends far beyond just Turkey. The Chinese have been providing technical assistance to help suppress and jam the Starlink terminals and satellite communications that were flooding into Iran. The Russians have contributed whatever capabilities they could bring to bear. The attempt to orchestrate a color revolution from within has been systematically dismantled, which brings us to the air campaign itself. Once it became clear that the internal destabilization operation had failed, the decision was made to escalate to direct military action. But here is what the American public was never told. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, according to multiple sources with knowledge of these discussions, warned the president that the original operational plan was no longer viable. The country was not imploding. The armed forces were intact. The integrated air defenses were operational. More firepower would be needed, and yet the campaign went forward anyway. Why? Because too many promises had been made to too many powerful people, and those promises demanded action. Now I need you to pay close attention to what I'm about to tell you, because this is where the story becomes truly alarming. There was a strange seismic event in Israel recently, a very short, very unusual earthquake that occurred in a region where Israel is believed to maintain its nuclear weapons facilities. The timing was suspicious. Israeli authorities had reportedly announced an earthquake drill at the very moment the event occurred, as if they somehow knew exactly when this earthquake was going to happen. We do not have technology that can predict earthquakes with that kind of precision, not unless you are causing the earthquake. Now, I cannot tell you definitively what happened. The information is being tightly controlled. The United States government, which is deeply intertwined with Israeli security operations, is not going to provide honest answers about whether this was an underground nuclear test at Dimona. But the possibility exists, and that possibility should terrify everyone who understands what nuclear weapons mean in this conflict. Israel is estimated to possess somewhere between 250 and 300 nuclear warheads. These can be delivered by submarine-launched cruise missiles from German-built Dolphin-class submarines. They can be launched from ground-based missile systems. They can be dropped from F-15 and F-35 aircraft. The capacity exists. The question is whether the willingness exists to use them. And here is what makes this situation so dangerous. From the very beginning of this crisis, there has been a risk that if things went badly enough for Israel, the leadership in Jerusalem might conclude that nuclear weapons are their only remaining option. A leadership that has shown through its actions in Gaza that it places little value on human life outside its own population. A leadership that is fighting not just a military conflict, but what it perceives as an existential struggle for survival. Some very significant regional actors have taken notice. Turkish President Erdogan has made public statements essentially telling Israel that Turkey knows what they have and is not afraid. Why is he not afraid? Because for decades, the Pakistanis have promised Turkey a nuclear weapon if they ever need one. That arrangement has been in place for 30 years or more. And if Israel were arrogant enough, desperate enough to actually use a nuclear weapon, we would see nuclear proliferation across the Middle East on a scale that would make the current crisis look like a minor diplomatic disagreement. That would be the end of Israel, not through conventional military defeat, but through the creation of a nuclear-armed regional environment where Israeli cities become targets for weapons they cannot defend against. So the stakes could not be higher, and yet the people making decisions in Washington seem utterly disconnected from these realities. Let me tell you about the demands that were communicated to Iran through back channels. A real estate developer named Steve Witkoff, who is friends with President Trump and runs around making deals with Jared Kushner while theoretically representing American interests, delivered a list of requirements. Stop enriching uranium, reduce missile stockpiles, reduce approximately 2,000 kilograms of enriched uranium material down to 60%. Stop supporting what the Americans and Israelis call regional proxies, which essentially means anyone Israel does not like. In return, sanctions would be lifted. Now, think about this from the Iranian perspective: a nation of 93 million people, a country the size of Western Europe, a civilization that has existed for millennia, and the Americans are telling them to disarm, to abandon their allies, to surrender their strategic deterrent, all based on promises from a government that has broken every agreement it ever made with Iran. This is not a serious negotiation. This is a demand for unconditional surrender dressed up in diplomatic language, and the Iranians know it, which is why the more you threaten them, the more convinced they become that they desperately need to build up their military capacity. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy of escalation that the architects of this policy seem incapable of understanding. Now, if you are finding this analysis valuable, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on because the situation is evolving rapidly and I will be bringing you updates as new information emerges. The mainstream media is not going to tell you what is really happening. You need independent sources that are willing to challenge the official narrative. Let me explain what this pause is actually about, because the propaganda you are being fed right now is designed to make you think that peace is at hand, that negotiations are progressing, that the adults in the room have finally prevailed. None of that is true. What is actually happening is a desperate scramble to replenish ammunition stocks. The United States and Israel expended enormous quantities of exotic missiles, rockets, and precision munitions in the first phase of this campaign. Those weapons are not manufactured overnight. They require specialized components, sophisticated manufacturing processes, and supply chains that stretch across multiple countries. And here is the critical detail that explains everything about the current situation. According to analysis from military research institutions, including a UK-based think tank that tracks munitions inventories, Israel is running critically low on multiple weapon systems: air-to-ground missiles, defensive interceptors, offensive ballistic missiles, the David Sling system, the Rampage supersonic missiles. System after system is approaching depletion dates that fall within the next few weeks. Think about what that means. Israel is a tiny country. Iran is massive. Iran has demonstrated the ability to launch waves of missiles and drones that overwhelm Israeli air defenses, and those air defenses are running out of interceptors. You do not see pictures of the Iron Dome successfully intercepting incoming missiles anymore. You do not see the dramatic footage of explosions in the sky that used to dominate news coverage of previous conflicts, because those interceptions are not happening. 8 out of every 10 missiles, according to some assessments, are now penetrating without opposition. The American situation is not much better. Every expensive radar system we had installed across the region to provide early warning has been destroyed, which means we have great difficulty detecting incoming missiles until they are almost on top of our forces. And remember, our supply lines stretch 6,700 miles back to the United States. Every missile we fire has to be replaced by something that has to be manufactured, transported across an ocean, loaded onto aircraft or ships, and delivered to the theater. This takes time, weeks, potentially months, and that is what this pause is about. It has nothing to do with peace. It has nothing to do with diplomacy. It is a desperate attempt to reload before the next phase of a campaign that has already demonstrated it cannot achieve its objectives. But here is where the strategic picture becomes truly alarming. Iran has spent over 20 years preparing for exactly this scenario. While American military planners were fighting counterinsurgency wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Iranian strategists were studying modern warfare and developing capabilities specifically designed to counter American power projection. What we are seeing now is a new way of war, the 21st century way of war. It involves linking space-based intelligence and reconnaissance to numerous strike weapons distributed across the entire country. This enables Iran to concentrate enormous firepower wherever they want to put it within minutes of identifying a target. And they are not doing this alone. The Chinese and the Russians are providing space-based intelligence. Anything that moves within 1,000 miles of Iran is immediately identified, tracked, and that information is transmitted near simultaneously to strike systems on the ground. Russia and China have no interest in seeing Iran destroyed. They have no interest in seeing Iranian society disintegrate. The Chinese buy roughly 30% of their oil from Iran through the Persian Gulf. The Russians view Iran as a critical partner for stability on their southern flank. Central Asia becomes exponentially more dangerous for Moscow if Iran fragments or falls into chaos. Iran is a crucial member of what we might call the China, Russia, India, Iran quadrangle. These nations are linked economically, strategically, and increasingly militarily. The One Belt, One Road initiative runs through Iranian territory. Trains are already arriving from China carrying goods. Iran is a member of BRICS. The integration is advancing rapidly while America focuses on military solutions to problems that require diplomatic approaches. So, what happens next? This is the question that keeps strategic analysts awake at night. The conventional playbook says that when air campaigns fail, you escalate to ground forces. That is what happened in Vietnam after Rolling Thunder failed to break North Vietnamese resistance. That is the pressure that built during the Kosovo air campaign when it became clear that 78 days of bombing was not achieving the stated objectives, but ground operations against Iran would be catastrophic. The country is too big, the population is too large. We could not control Afghanistan with all the resources we committed over 20 years. Vietnam proved that American military power cannot simply impose its will on a determined population fighting on its own territory. Unless you are willing to go in and essentially behave like Genghis Khan and kill 40 or 50 million people to make your point, which thank God we have not been willing to do, there is no military solution to this conflict. And yet the logic of the situation pushes toward escalation because the alternative is admitting defeat. And the people who started this war, the people who promised a short, decisive victory, the people who told the president that Iran would crumble under pressure, those people cannot admit they were wrong. Their careers, their reputations, their entire worldview depends on doubling down. The definition of insanity, as the saying goes, is doing the same thing over and over again while expecting different results. And that is exactly what we are witnessing. A plan to launch another war-winning offensive using weapons that are being rushed to the theater during this fake pause. An offensive that will fail for the same reasons the first phase failed. And then what? There is talk about seizing islands in the Persian Gulf, small islands that could theoretically serve as forward operating bases. But you do not need to sit on an island to defend it in modern warfare. Those islands can be saturated with intermediate-range ballistic missiles and tactical munitions from launch sites deep inside Iran. Put a few hundred soldiers on a 15-square-kilometer island and a handful of missiles turns it into a mass grave. This is not 1944. This is not even 1984. Warfare has fundamentally changed, and American strategic thinking has not kept pace with that change. The Iranians have made something very clear. If their oil infrastructure is attacked, if their desalination plants are destroyed, they will wipe out everything in the Persian Gulf, every oil facility, every port, every piece of energy infrastructure belonging to countries that have supported this war. Think about what that means for the global economy. Oil prices are already spiking. Supply chains are already under stress. People in India are lining up to fill their gas tanks. Similar situations are emerging in Japan and across Europe. And this is before the second phase of the war has even begun. If the Persian Gulf energy infrastructure is destroyed, we are looking at an economic catastrophe that dwarfs anything in living memory. The Russians, incidentally, are making more than $250 million a day more than they previously did because of how this conflict has disrupted global energy markets. But even Moscow and Beijing want this to end because they see supply chains being destroyed that affect everyone. The question is whether anyone in Washington is listening, and the evidence suggests they are not. Now, I want to address something that does not get discussed enough in mainstream coverage of this conflict: the role of influence, the role of money, the role of the people who actually shape American foreign policy decisions. President Trump surrounds himself with New York City billionaires. Many of these billionaires are deeply committed to the Israeli agenda. They contributed enormous sums to his election campaign, and there is an expectation, an understanding that at some point those investments need to produce returns. When the president gave his State of the Union address and talked about stopping Iran from having a nuclear weapon, when he said the United States would take whatever action was required, he received a standing ovation from virtually everyone in Congress, Democrats and Republicans alike, because members of both parties have effectively been purchased by the Israel lobby and the billionaire donors who fund it. This is not anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. This is documented fact. The amounts of money flowing from pro-Israel donors to American political candidates are a matter of public record. The policy positions those donations purchase are visible in every vote, every resolution, every unconditional statement of support, regardless of what actions Israel actually takes. Some commentators have called Trump the first Jewish president of the United States, not because of his religion, but because of his total alignment with Israeli policy preferences. The concern among those who study these dynamics is that instead of acting like the president of the United States, he acts like the president of Israel, rushing to defend Israeli interests come hell or high water, regardless of what that means for American security, American soldiers, American economic interests. And when the key advisors, when the people whispering in the presidential ear are all committed Zionists with financial and ideological ties to the Israeli right wing, what other outcome could we expect? The path out of this crisis exists. It would require the president to fire the people around him who got us into this mess. It would require him to step forward and admit that mistakes were made. It would require disengagement and a genuine request for mediation from parties that all sides could trust. If that happened, leaders from around the world would come forward to help negotiate an end to this tragedy. Countries like India, countries that maintain relationships with all parties and have credibility as honest brokers. The diplomatic infrastructure exists to wind this down if the political will existed to use it, but that would require admitting failure. And the people who started this war are not ready to do that. They would rather double down on a failing strategy than acknowledge that the fundamental assumptions underlying their approach were wrong. So we are left watching a slow motion catastrophe unfold, a catastrophe that did not have to happen, a catastrophe that serves no American interest, and a catastrophe that enriches defense contractors and ideological zealots while ordinary people on all sides pay the price in blood and treasure. The Lincoln Carrier Battle Group is still on its way to the region. There may be a second carrier group deployed soon. The weapons are being restocked. The plans for the next offensive are being finalized. And unless something dramatic changes in the decision-making process, we are going to see this war escalate further. The potential exists for something truly catastrophic: regional conflagration, nuclear escalation, economic collapse that ripples across the entire global system. These are not hypothetical scenarios dreamed up by pessimists. These are the logical endpoints of the trajectory we are currently on. What you can do is stay informed, challenge the narratives you are being fed, ask hard questions about who benefits from this conflict and who pays the costs. Demand accountability from elected officials who have enabled this disaster. Support independent voices who are willing to tell you truths that the mainstream media will not touch. The future is not written. Choices still matter. Pressure from an informed public can still influence outcomes, but only if people understand what is actually happening rather than accepting the sanitized version presented by officials with every incentive to hide their failures. This is not about left versus right. This is not about Republican versus Democrat. This is about whether America serves its own interests or whether it serves the interests of a foreign government and its domestic backers. That is the question at the heart of this crisis, and how we answer it will determine the trajectory of American foreign policy for a generation. Don't stop here. The world is full of developments that the mainstream media refuses to cover honestly. Click on the next video and join me as we continue to expose the hidden dynamic shaping our future. The truth is out there, but you have to be willing to look for it.